explaining the 5 calamities of the Dark Continent from Hunter x Hunter. Alright, so before we dive into each calamity one by one, let's talk about them categorically and why humanity refers to them as calamities and why humanity willingly brought them back from the Dark Continent. So first, a quick topography reminder of the world of Hunter x Hunter. This small blue circle in the bottom left-hand corner here is human existence in the world of Hunter x Hunter as we know it. All of the continents, all of humanity, the kingdoms, everything takes place in that circle. And that circle is smack dab in the middle of an enormous lake in the true world of Hunter x Hunter, which is referred to as the Dark Continent. And just imagine that this map continues all the way around in a 360 around this small blue circle. So it's enormous. And again, human civilization, everything we know is just in that tiny circle. So the Dark Continent is this vast beyond out here. And to put it very simply, the Dark Continent is extremely dangerous. As you can see here, it is filled to the brim with absolute terrors, but it also is filled with treasures and resources. So there are very compelling reasons to go here. But even just making it to the Dark Continent is no small feat, because you have to travel through this vast, horrific ocean to even get there. And humanity has never made that journey on their own, at least not any documented trips. They've only been able to navigate this ocean with the help of a faction on the Dark Continent. This faction is simply known as the Gatekeeper, and we don't know much about them at all other than that they are a race of magical beasts. And the Gatekeeper connects humanity with an entity known as the Guide, and we don't know much about the Guide either other than the fact that they guide humanity from their world to the Dark Continent and presumably back, but there is a price for this. In exchange for facilitating travel to the Dark Continent, the Guide requires that humanity bring back an extinction-level threat from the Dark Continent to the human world. And that brings us to the 5 calamities of the Dark Continent, aka the 5 great threats. 5 extinction-level entities that humanity was forced to bring back home with them as penance for stepping onto the Dark Continent. Now there are 5 because each one represents a different excursion by humanity to the Dark Continent, but we're not necessarily limited to 5, there are just 5 that we're aware of. And I mention this because the Chimera ants were thought to have originated on the Dark Continent as well, so perhaps they too were forcibly brought back to the human world due to a contract with the Guide, just of a trip we aren't aware of yet. And speaking of the Chimera ants, they were given a classification of B in regards to their threat to humanity. All 5 of the other Dark Continent threats are ranked higher than that. Now, we don't know too much about each of these threats, but I'm going to go through them one by one. But before we do, I wanted to give you guys this good infographic here that you can reference if you're interested in seeing like which part of the Dark Continent each of these threats came from. And again, this body of water here in the middle is the enormous lake that the human world is contained within. It's that tiny little speck that's magnified here. So as you can see, the Dark Continent is enormous. So let's start with the botanical weapon known as Brionne, and this entity is a result of the United States of Saherta's expedition to the Dark Continent, where they went 400 kilometers to the north and found a labyrinth city. Inside this city, they found Brionne serving as its guardian, and Brionne wiped out the entire force except for 2 people. So we don't know what exactly this is depicting, but my best guess would be that this is a normal human that has been infected with Brionne, whatever Brionne does. So this is also an entire species. Like Brionne isn't just a singular entity. The only other information we have on Brionne is this image here, which is presumably another one of its victims, and as you can see, the stomach exploded. So this is very much an alien face-hugger type of vibe. So maybe it infects people by surrounding their heads and then uses their bodies to procreate. Our next entity is the gaseous life form known as I, and this is a result of the Mimbo Republic's expedition to the Dark Continent in which they explored the southwestern direction. And we actually know the most about this entity because we've actually seen it front and center in the manga. And that's because Togashi revealed in one of the volume extras that Nanika, the entity possessing Killua's sister, is an I. Now, I's full title is The Codependence of Desire, and we have an idea of what that's referring to since we've seen Nanika's interactions with Killua. She is always after his acceptance and approval, and she wields tremendous power. She has the ability to grant wishes, but that comes with a cost. And the other side of that coin is Nanika and presumably all I have the ability to brutally murder people in an instant by twisting them up, and you can see some of their victims here. And there is presumably no limit on this. Like, the bigger the wish, the more victims there potentially are, with no limit on its range or anything like that. Just instantaneously, hundreds of people can be twisted up and murdered by this. So imagine an entire species of I out there granting wishes. Like, humanity could literally end overnight. Our next threat is the twin snake Hellbell, a monster that infects its prey with homicidal desire. Now, this entity was the result of the Federation of Ochima's expedition to the Dark Continent, where they explored the very south of the continent. Now, pretty much the only thing we know about Hellbell is what we can glean from its title, because ever since it was brought back to the human world, there hasn't been much movement or motion from it that we're aware of. But we know that it is the monster that infects its prey with homicidal desire. So presumably, if this thing bites you or stings you, it forces you to go on a murderous rampage. We know that it killed 99% of the expedition force that it encountered. Our next entity is known as PAP, and its title is A Trade-Off Between Life and Pleasure, the beast that keeps humans as pets. PAP is the result of the Bergeros Union's expedition to the Dark Continent, in which they sent 1,000 forces to explore the north. However, when those forces entered PAP's territory, only 7 of them survived. And what we can understand about PAP is that it somehow connects to humans, like you can see in this picture here, and basically forces them to serve them. They keep them as pets. And the humans experience great pleasure and happiness, but they are essentially puppets for this beast. We also know PAP to be currently active in the human world because the Bureau has some of its victims and is studying them. And finally, we have despair under the guise of hope, the immortality disease known as Zobei. Now, Zobei is the result of the Kukan Yu's expedition to the Dark Continent, in which they explored the southeastern part of it, and they did this in conjunction with a group of hunters who helped guide them, and leading that group of hunters was Beyond Netero. Now, of this entire retinue, only 6 people survived, including Beyond. They were all wiped out by this disease. And of those 6 survivors, one of them is still infected with the disease. That hunter has now been detained and studied by the Bureau for over 50 years, but the Zobei disease has made them functionally immortal, but they're able to do that by self-sustaining on their own flesh. And as you can see here, it seems their mind is kind of gone from them as well. And here's another graph that's a bit easier to read that'll give you somewhat of a breakdown of the classification of each of those threats. So yeah, those are the 5 Dark Continent calamities, each one basically wielding the potential to completely wipe out humanity. And these are only the ones we're aware of. And right now in the story, we're headed to the Dark Continent again. So might we be bringing back a 6th calamity soon? We'll have to see. Y'all, that's going to do it for this one, but I got to give a massive shout out to my boy Young Skur here for the donation. Thank you so much for the support, man. And y'all be sure to let me know down below which of these threats is your favorite and which one you think is the most dangerous. And finally, thank you so much for watching.